All right, hey there everyone. So today we're going to do an initial review of the Garden Tower 2. We got this about a couple of weeks ago. Thought I'd share my initial impressions about this, and of course, as time goes on, I'll share what I continue to learn about it. For those who are not familiar, this is another vertical garden system, which is there to help you maximize growing space by growing vertically instead of a traditional, pot or raised garden bed or even just on the ground. So in this case, the Garden Tower 2 allows you to plant up to 50 different plants, which will help you maximize space. So if you have a small garden or maybe a patio or just a balcony to grow something, this would be a potentially great option for you. This does start at $4.99, which is probably on the pricier side that I do see for vertical garden systems, not including hydroponics or aeroponics systems. It does come in uh, two colors. So here you have terracotta, but there's also a warm sandstone. Now, just to note, does start at $4.99, but I do find that it does go on sale somewhat frequently. So you could take that into consideration to wait for a sale. It does have 5 layers. I kind of say it a little bit of hesitation. As you can see here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the reason why I hesitate a little bit is I'll explain a little bit more, but these aren't like a traditional tier that you'll see in other systems where you can kind of pick up each tier or layer and rearrange. These are actually rings. So this is all one big column of soil. And the rings are just areas where you can kind of plant things into the pockets. Now, it does take 6 cubic feet of soil, or about 179 quarts, which makes it probably one of the bigger systems that, of course, use soil still. Now, what makes this system a bit unique is that not only is it a vertical garden, but it's also a worm compost bin. So you get a little bit of a hybrid system, so to speak. And we'll go into a little bit of detail of that. But I thought I would share what I love about the system and what I don't love about the system so far. So let's start with the things I love about the system. So for starters, it's really easy to set up. So when you first get it, this whole bottom section right here already comes as one piece. You'll get the this piece, which is a screen, and this is the basin where water kind of flows into. You just put that in, and that bottom section is already there. You're then going to get these other pieces that just snap into place, one on top of each other. There's then this middle tower section, and that's for the worm tower, and that also comes in, I believe, five or 6 pieces that just snap together into one tube that you can also put on top with the cap. Now, once that is put in, you can then start filling with your soil of choice. And you just add the soil, add some water, and kind of layer it up. So I really like this because it doesn't require a ton of heavy lifting. Some other larger tiers may require you to fill a tier and then lift that filled tier on top of the other. Whereas this one, it can be something that you can do slowly and make it easier on your back. Next, as you can see and tell from what I've shared so far, this is pretty big, and the plastic is fairly thick. Let me bring it up a little closer. The plastic, as you can see, fairly thick, very rigid, and like I'm trying to shake this thing and it's very sturdy. So it is something that I do love about this system, is that it is a very sturdy tier. Another thing that I love is that you do have that worm tower. So something that a lot of other systems have trouble with is that, or even potted plants, is that slowly you're gonna have to add fertilizer, right? You're gonna have to add amendments. You may need to change out the soil, if you're planting multiple plants, right, or adding new plants year after year, because it's everything that all the nutrients is all in that single pot or that single tier, whatever it is. Because it's not connected to the ground, it can't grab nutrients. There's no life in there from like bugs or worms and things like that to kind of add in to that. So the worm tower being added in helps mitigate that. And that's in the middle. You can feed it some kitchen scraps here and there, and the worms will eat that food and then create worm castings, or in essence, worm poop. And that will then be spread out throughout the entire systems as they move around, and it kind of adds that fertilizer naturally. So what I'm helping is that them doing that, also moving through aerates the soil, will create a healthier soil for your plants to thrive. That was a huge selling point for me because I'm a little bit of a lazy gardener. I don't want to have the idea of having to constantly add more fertilizer and things like that. So I'm hoping that this helps with that scenario. Next, their watering system. So you do water from the top, just like a traditional tiered system. But what I like about this is that the water doesn't just drain out. Now, draining out is, of course, a good thing because you don't want your plants to be waterlogged, and that would be bad for the plants itself. But when it drains out, you kind of potentially drain out some of those nutrients. So what's great is the water all drains out here into that basin that I showed earlier. And what you can do is, as it fills up, you can take that basin out and either dump it back on top to try and see if it can reabsorb some of that, or of course, put it on your other potted plants, and you can do that as well. The other nice thing I like about this is that since it's not draining out, you could theoretically have this indoors because all that liquid is draining into the bin. You can pull the bin out and then dump it in your other house plants or back into the system to have it reabsorb everything. So that's another huge plus. I don't usually see other systems talk about being indoors as much. I think part of it might be because of the watering system is draining out, which is totally fine for outdoors, but could be a complicated scenario if you're indoors trying to make sure that you don't have water in the house. And lastly, I do love that they have a built-in spinner. It does take a little bit of force to spin, but I do like that it's built in. There's some ball bearings in that initial layer. You don't have to assemble that. That's already part of the system base, and it's great for if you're indoors and you need to rotate it so one side gets more sun, or if you're outdoors and maybe you're under an awning and you want to rotate it a little bit so that all sides of your garden tower get sun. All right, so those are all the things that I love. Let's move on to some of the things that I don't love as much. So the first thing, this is probably an issue with most vertical systems that I find, and it's that even though I can water the top here, and all of that is going to travel down through the entire tower, these pockets, they don't get fully watered. So it's usually about, I don't know, about a third or so that stay a little dry. So you do need to water from the outside, especially for seedlings or if you're just planting seeds. When you have established plants, I imagine that this problem will go away, but this is just something that to be aware of. Next, the pockets are actually kind of small in my opinion. So here is an example of the pocket size, and you can see this little small strawberry plant here. It's fine for most plants probably, but in my opinion, you may run into some problems if you're growing things like onions that may need more space. Now, to be fair, there is the top section that is completely open, and you can choose to use that area for onions, of course, but it's just something to be aware of. Now, On the plus side, having the pocket so small, I probably don't have room for mulch, so I probably will have less weed problems. So it's definitely something to be aware about when you're thinking about what you're planting. Probably won't be a problem for most plants, but more of a problem for certain things that um, are a little bit larger above, like onions and such. Now, I shared earlier that this thing is sturdy, and it really is, right? You don't have tiers really disconnecting. This is all one big column of soil, but that also means you aren't moving this thing. Wherever you put it, that's where it is going to stay. So that is a good thing if you want to make sure that it doesn't tip over, of course. But if you plan on moving, if you're in an apartment and you're not sure about if you're going to move somewhere in the next year, and you're like, oh great, how do I move this thing? That's something to be aware of. Now they do have an accessory for wheels, which I did not purchase because I do not plan on moving this item, moving the garden tower. But if you're like, okay, I'm going to be moving around, you can purchase the wheels. But that kind of leads to my next thing that I don't love quite a bit, and that is that accessory is actually really expensive. Just to get the wheels, it's $120, which I think is a bit much for wheels. Now, there are some metal bars to support the weight, and then from there are these three caster wheels, but still 120 after paying so much for the garden tower feels a bit steep for me. If you do want to, of course, move it, you'd have to disassemble the whole thing and, move the soil out into other buckets, things like that. So that part is a bit of a pain. And the last thing is that, I think the biggest selling point for this is the being a all-in-one system, being the vertical tower plus a composting system. If you're not interested in worms, if you're not interested in doing the composting with worms specifically, if you would rather compost in other ways, then this may not be the system for you. I feel like that is the great thing about this system, is that you have that vermicomposting portion. While you could remove that middle tower and just fill it in with soil, and you're just fine, it feels like that's where some of that pricing comes in. So, like, for example, my wife, she loves planting flowers, things like that, does not like the worm bin and the worm composting system that I have set up, and I take care of all that. This is great for me because, again, I don't mind and actually enjoy vermicomposting. But again, if you don't enjoy that portion of it, it could be a bit pricey for just having a vertical garden. As an example, you have other vertical gardens like, Mr. Stacky or the Green Stalk that are just vertical gardens and would be a little bit cheaper from that price point because they don't have that vermicompost tower in there. And at the same time, the other vermicompost systems like a urban worm bag or another 5-tier system might be, $150. So, okay, so my initial impressions overall, I do love this system, and that's because I'm a bit of a lazy gardener, and I like the idea of having my vertical garden because I have a small space, but also leveraging the vermicomposting system so that I don't have to change out the soil very much. So I'm hoping that this does as designed, and I don't have to worry about replacing or amending the soil too much there. Uh, Time will tell on how well this compares to other systems. I do have similar plants with the same soil planting in other vertical gardens. So I think time will tell to see, hey, are we producing more over time because I have the vermicompost system built in. So I hope that helps. If you learned something new or enjoyed this video, please comment or like. Your feedback helps me understand what content you enjoy and guides future videos. I plan to make more videos on vermicomposting and other compact garden setups. and even a comparison between the Greenstock and the Garden Tower 2. So if you're interested, subscribe to my channel to get updates on when those are released. Thanks everyone.